Last month, I interviewed Queen's University law professor Bruce Pardy. At the beginning of the year, he published the Alberta Declaration of Independence, and he is a legal and constitutional expert in this country. And I think it would be fair to say that since publishing that document, he has become one of the intellectual leaders of the Alberta Separatist movement. And I wanted to balance out the conversation and get the other side, get the other argument on this critical debate that doesn't just impact Alberta and its people's place in the country, but it impacts the entire country as a whole. And so to do that, I'm pleased to be joined now by Ted Morton. Between the years 2009 and 2012, Morton served as Alberta's finance minister, energy minister, and natural resources minister. He currently serves as the executive fellow at the University of Calgary School of Public Policy and is the vice president of the advocacy organization Fairness Alberta. Ted, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Harrison, for inviting me.
It would be fair to say that Alberta separatists are arguing that every attempt to resolve Alberta's long-standing issues with the federal government and its place within Confederation have been exhausted and tried before. These attempts have failed, and so their only option left on the table is to proceed with a referendum on separation. You yourself are not a separatist, so I'd like to ask you first, what hasn't been done that can be done either by the federal government or the provincial government to resolve some of these long-standing issues that are facing Albertans within Canada?
Well, I've been part of a movement in Alberta for the last 30, almost 40 years, going back to Preston Manning and the Reform Party that saw this, particularly after Trudeau's national energy program, but actually it goes back much further. Just the vulnerability of Alberta, Western Canada generally, and Alberta specifically, to Eastern policies. And we still have a 19th century constitution, which basically Quebec and Ontario own. And we have a 21st century economy and society where wealth and population has moved out to the West. And the Constitution hasn't kept up with the times. Alberta is vulnerable to, well, the last election proves it. Carney and the Liberals need a majority, 170 seats. Ontario and Quebec, 172 seats. Ontario and Quebec by themselves have 200 MPs. They got their 170. They fell too short, but still a government. 2/3 of them are from Ontario and Quebec. And from Alberta and Saskatchewan, they're 3 MPs. So that basically shows the continuing irrelevance of Western Canada in national elections. And so the critics, the argument you just made, that the separatists made, that the efforts of the last 20, 30 years haven't worked, they're right. And but I think Premier Smith and the UCP are at that too, and they're pushing for more. And that's one of the reasons I think it's pretty clear there's going to be a referendum question as part of the next provincial election.
And we'll get into that question and some of your thoughts on the proposed referendum question that we've seen so far. But it seems to me that one of the biggest pain points in the relationship between the Alberta government and the federal government, and broadly for the people of Alberta with the rest of the country, is Canada's equalization system and the general unfairness of this equalization system. What constitutional hurdles need to be overcome to actually reform the equalization system in this country?
Well, equalization by itself is really just a small fraction, probably less than 10% of the total net transfers out of Alberta. Things like unemployment insurance and social insurance and unemployment insurance are much, much bigger. Health transfers. Again, it reflects a general imbalance. As far as equalization itself goes, there are all sorts of problems with it. Alberta gets, even in bad years, Alberta gets nothing. It doesn't take into effect the cost. It doesn't take into account the cost of delivering health care, just what the different provinces have. But it'd be a waste of time just to talk about equalization. The net transfers out of Alberta over the last 25 years have averaged between $15 and $20 billion a year. $15 and $20 billion a year. That's the net outflow of cash from Alberta to Ottawa that gets redistributed obviously elsewhere. And particularly in the mid-teens, the early years of the Trudeau government, basically Alberta shut down because of Trudeau's energy policies. Unemployment soared, people lost jobs, companies left. Alberta Energy, one of the first big Alberta energy companies, not only changed its name, but it left Alberta and moved to Denver. So things like that. That's people. It's not just cash that's leaving, people losing jobs. I'm 60 years old. Excuse me. I wish I was 60. I'm 75 years old. I have kids your age or a little bit older. Lots of them and their friends have left Alberta because in the last decade there's been more opportunity in Ontario and BC or the United States. Even worse, they're leaving Canada. So but the big figure on transfers is that $15 to $20 billion average over the last 25 years.
So how can that be changed and reformed to be better put into the interests of Albertans who seem to be paying into this and not getting anything out of it? I imagine that reforming that is key to resolving these major issues. Is there a way to do that?
Well, yeah, but it's complicated. I don't think on air your listeners would be that interested in getting into the details. One of the things that both Premier Jason Kenney and now Premier Daniel Smith have talked about, well, the Kenney government endorsed it, is an Alberta pension plan, right? With Alberta withdrawing from the Canada pension plan. Quebec, when the pension plan was set up, every province has the right to have its own pension plan. Quebec exercised that option at the beginning. Alberta could do it. If Alberta leaves the CPP, not only does it take, there's a debate of what share of the Canada pension plan assets would go to Alberta. I think it ranges from 150 billion to close to 400 billion. In terms of contributions, Albertans way over contribute. Well, Albertans contribute much more than other provinces on a per capita basis because we have a much younger population, people working, and higher salaries. So those types of savings right away, if the pension plan comes back to Alberta, Alberta could pay the same level of benefits at lower contribution rates, both for employees and employers, or pay better dividends, or both. But that'd be one example.
Right, and I think you're right about the nitty-gritty details and how you can go down that path. But I think the larger point I'm trying to get at is it seems that a lot of these issues facing Alberta that are pain points in this relationship would require constitutional changes, things that can't be done overnight and that require a lot of effort and time. But are there things like the pension plan and others that can be done quickly, that can quickly resolve this situation, or at least, resolve the situation to a degree that longer form changes can be addressed without the pressure of a looming separatist crisis?
Well, the structural reforms that I advocated for back with Stephen Harper before he was Prime Minister, and some others, the so-called firewall letter, we identified 3 reforms that we thought would make sense, that would increase Alberta's autonomy, its ability to be self-governing, less dependent upon Ottawa. That was policing, pension, and tax collection. The Kenney government had a committee that recommended all of those, and certainly Danielle Smith, the current premier, is looking at all of those, and she starts on a tour of Alberta for the next 6 or 7 weeks. I think she starts next week on what she calls the next committee, and those are options that are structural changes that could be done more or less unilaterally, or at least in cooperation with some cooperation from Ottawa. So that's a start.
Right, and I wonder as well if, because there are some changes that can be done unilaterally and quickly, and others that can't, Would a change in rhetoric from the federal government go a long way in resolving some of these issues, or is Alberta past that point? Is the idea that some good fair talk to Albertans, would that go anywhere, or is that ship sailed? If you know what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I mean, Prime Minister Carney is saying a lot of encouraging things, positive things about energy, about the economy, about major energy infrastructure. But you know enough about Canadian politics already. Know not just Canadian politics, all politics. Talk is cheap, action matters. So I think there's a bit of a honeymoon or trial marriage right now between Premier Daniels, well, the Western premiers, and Prime Minister Carney. People want to see, will he have actions to match the talk? He pushed through C5, the government bill C5 a couple weeks ago, which purports to allow the cabinet to identify priority national infrastructure issues and expedite their approval. That sounds good on paper, but I've been around long enough to know that people who are opposed to this kind of thing can go to the courts and spend a lot of time and a lot of money getting legal answers to complex legal questions. And again, listeners know, in business in the real world, time is money. That's why so many energy companies, including Canadian-based energy companies, have either left Canada or moved most of their operations south of the border, because it became, with all the litigation, with all the delays, Trans Mountain Pipeline. Sometimes the Trudeau people like to say, "Look, we built a pipeline, Trans Mountain expansion." Well, Trans Mountain expansion, the final price tag is going to be something like $34 billion. We were working on with the companies on Trans Mountain expansion when I was back in government in the late 2000 or early 2000s, early 2010s. The estimated cost then was around $6 billion, and it's ended up, federal government ended up buying it 30. So it's 21 years late, and instead of $6 billion, it's 34 billion. And so that's why things haven't worked. And again, not everybody. Trans Mountain expansion was just followed an existing pipeline. There already was a pipeline there. It was just so the same corridor was already being used. So it just shows you that to take advantage of Alberta's opportunities, you need access to markets, and not just American markets. The experience with Trump in the last 6 or 7 months shows over-reliance is a problem on U.S. markets, and so. But you don't get to the international markets without pipelines.
I want to switch gears and talk about the referendum question proposed by the Alberta Prosperity Project. You wrote in the Calgary Herald that the proposed question by the advocacy group, that is, do you agree that Alberta shall become a sovereign country and cease to be a province of Canada, yes or no? You take issue with that. For those that haven't read the article, can you explain what the problem is with this proposed question and how you would change it?
Well, we know the answer to the question already. It'll get somewhere between 15 and 25% support for yes. That's sort of where the separatist sentiment is in Alberta. So what do you do with that? To the rest of Canada, they'll look at Alberta and say, well, 75% of Albertans don't want to leave, so we don't have to worry about Alberta. So it's not going to change anything vis-a-vis Ottawa and the rest of Canada. And at home, there's that 15 to 25%, the people that vote that say, well, maybe we'll go out and we'll form our own party, right? We'll form our own party and have a separatist party. All that will do is split the Conservative vote between two parties, which is what we did in 2015. And of course, that elected an NDP government. So it has the likelihood of negative consequences at home, no consequences outside of Alberta, or even worse, that you can ignore Alberta. Only 20% of the people, you don't have to worry about separatism. So as I've proposed an alternative an alternative question. We can talk about that if that's where you want to
Right.
go.
Yeah, I would like to hear it. I think the audience would be interested.
Well, I think the question should be a two-question referendum. The first question should be, are you satisfied with the status quo? And for those people who say no, then the question two is, which of the following reforms would you like to see done in order to address your dissatisfaction with the status quo? I think the yes/no on separation ignores this. I'd say the 60% of us. Maybe there are 20% of Albertans that are happy to want to leave. Maybe there are 20% of Albertans that think the status quo is great. I think that's 20% might be high, but that still leaves 60% of us in between, right? And we'd like to have a voice, and we're not happy with the status quo. We want change, and there could be question two. There could be a list of options from the minimal, sort of some policy changes to the biggest change, which of course is separation. So sort of a spectrum of choices, and the election's 2 years away, and this could serve, if that discussion starts now, which it may be this summer with the next committee that Premier Smith is taking around the province. I think it would be a worthwhile debate, and it would include all of us, not just the 20% who want to leave and the 20% who like the status quo. And the example of this that I give is New Zealand changed its electoral system a couple decades ago, and that's how they went about it. Question one is, are you satisfied with first past the post? They had an electoral system similar to ours, sort of the English-speaking model, England, Canada, U.S. And the question one, are you satisfied with that? I think 60 or 70% said no. And the question two was, well, which of the following options would you prefer? And after a decade of discussion and debate, they moved to a different system, and based on the results to the answer to question two. So I think there's an example out there that shows that type of two-question referendum can work, and I think would work. It would fit quite well to where where Albertans are at right now.
I've read that there are some Albertans who feel that the province is treated more as an economic colony than like a province. And I want to know, in your opinion, is Alberta a colony in the traditional sense, and less of a province like the rest of the country?
Well, I mean, that was a metaphor, and it was rhetorical. And the author, we can say who the author is Jack Mintz. And again, Jack Mintz isn't just sort of a ride 'em high Calgary beer drinking Albertan. Jack Mintz has been a senior economist at the C.D. Howe Institute. He's been in the Ministry of Finance in Alberta, in the Government of Canada, in Ontario. Jack is from Alberta, but his entire career until 15 or 20 years ago was in the East. He's one of the most respected economists in Canada. And so for Jack Mintz to use the colony metaphor to describe Alberta's vulnerability to what I said 15 minutes ago, that $20 billion a year, that net transfer out, that's the colony aspect. And if we had a Senate like Australia, like the United States, that balanced rep by pop in the lower house with equal representation in the Senate, that's how the less populous Western states or the less populous Western provinces in Australia, how they articulate and defend their interest in national politics there. Canada doesn't have that option. And in 1867, there weren't even provinces west of Ontario. But when they came in, they were treated as there's a famous, well-known Canadian historian that referred to them as provinces in the Roman sense. In other words, where you extract wealth and bring it home, and that's how it worked. And again, I think most of your viewers will remember this one. The Trudeau wasn't the campaign slogan, but it was the inside strategy in 1980 for the National Energy Program. Screw the West, we'll take the rest. And it works because, as I said, still, you need 172 seats for a majority. Ontario and Quebec have 200 seats. you don't need any seats from Alberta or Saskatchewan to form majority governments. And what happened in April proved it yet again.
And I think the metaphor is an interesting one because it's a framing of the conversation that I haven't come across, but I think it's powerful in how it can be perceived. To play the position of the separatist, I can understand how if you are in Alberta, you watch that there is essentially nothing that can be done from an electoral perspective when choosing your government if you happen to be on the other side of a debate with the eastern provinces, right? The vote is essentially counted, or the decision is counted before ballots are counted in Manitoba even. So
that rubs it in even deeper, yes.
Right. And so I can see how the logical leap from that would be, well, there's nothing else we can do, and so that's the only option left on the table is to proceed with the referendum on separation. To people who are separatists, to Albertans who feel like that is their only option, what is your message to them?
There are reforms that could be done and should be done short of separation to fix the imbalance, to fix the disconnect between our 21st century economy and our 19th century constitution that would allow the West, Alberta specifically, but the Western provinces more generally, or I would go further and say all provinces to have more autonomy and get the federal government out of some of the policy areas that it's in now, in which it's doing these big transfers. Again, screw the West, we'll take the rest. All these federal programs, it's not just about equalization, it's about every program. It ends up moving money out of, particularly out of BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan to the rest of the provinces. So if it turns out that Carney ends up being just a smarter talking Trudeau and nothing changes, then I would say support for separatism will grow. To me, the status quo, and I think I reflect a lot of. I think I'm kind of in the middle, but still, this is potentially a problem for Canada. That the status quo is just as problematic as separatism. I've been very clear in my interviews with people like you and what I write and in my public speaking that everything that Preston Manning, Stephen Harper, Jason Kenney, Ted Morton, the whole reform conservative movement from the West over the last 30 years, we failed. We're as vulnerable today as actually, I think maybe more vulnerable. Peter Lougheed got some concessions back in the Meech Lake and Charlottetown Accords, and in the Constitution Act, and those have been eroded or ignored. So I'm very pessimistic about the status quo, and I think it's important for the rest of Canada to understand just how normal people, and okay, I'm a professor, I'm not a normal person, but that there are a lot of really normal people who are proud to be Canadians, but they've just had it. They're sick and tired of seeing 20% of what they earn go to pay for healthcare and education and clean water and housing in other provinces rather than in their own province.
We'll have to leave it there. Dr. Ted Morton, thank you for joining me and for sharing your insights on this critical debate facing the country.
Thank you, Harrison. I hope we shed some light on a complicated but very important issue.
If you enjoyed that video and you want to see more in-depth analysis, debate, and conversation about issues affecting Canadian Confederation, let me know by liking this video, subscribing to my channel, and sharing this video with your networks. Thank you for watching.